What I advise for twin flame healing, in other words, inner work, in other words, ending separation, is doing the key tool with the 4 steps as shared in our community, Your Abundance. Inside one key of the day, so called, the hashtag, you can experience a whole world of healing happening that includes body work, energy work, but also psychological work. When you close it off, this one key of the day, you've repaired on the spiritual level though, that includes the psychological. The spiritual level is the ultimate level, the being level, the soul level, the divine level. The psychological level is where your interpersonal understanding of things comes to a healthy balance. There can be huge shifts there that move you light years away from what you by now understand is abuse and victimhood of some sort. They can have psychological names, and researching what literature says about it can give context to what you're experiencing. I advise to do it in that order. Aim for spiritual healing with the depth of the divine. And when you've traveled past psychological elements inside of that, you might want to give that understanding and context if you like. Although it is not a strict necessity, you could do so and archive what you've traveled through in your realness binder, hashtag realness binder. That's what we use in our community too. I feel it's healthy to get an amount of grip on sane psychology, including some terminology. But spiritual healing surpasses it completely at the very same time. That's, after all, where your psychology will fall in divine order. And you'll always stay up to date with what new revelations will become active inside you that are fit for your present phase of union. So that is how I would summarize my approach to the question, what is the relationship between psychological issues and spiritual healing for twin flames? Now, how does that look like? Well, for instance, for me, it looked like I understood on a relatively young age, when I was around 19, 20, what psychological issues there were. And that sounded for me, for instance, like that I had been growing up in a kind of a narcissistic family structure, and that gave me issues in my psychology that were easily related back to that. And I also had issues because within that umbrella of that terminology, I was also sexually abused, which you, by the way, often see in narcissistic abuse. That is just very close to sexual abuse as well. It's actually pervasive, and it invades in all, especially intimate layers of life of you. And yeah, you've pretty much been conned about what the reality is and what the reality of love is when you are very much brainwashed into this narcissistic problematic kind of relating. And that didn't do very much for me, that I knew that that was so, and I started to understand some theory about that. But also around that time, I actually started my spiritual healing process, my spiritual journey, when I was starting to do meditation and yoga and giving my actual interest in the divine and the Christ also, which is the Christ consciousness, that I had been feeling for over a decade already. So actually my entire life, since I was able to become a consciously thinking human, I could express that, and I actually did. And of course, before that, I was very spiritual already, because that's how that becomes active when you become a consciously reasoning and communicating young child. But anyway, so in my when I was like 20, I met my spiritual teacher in the atmosphere, in meditation and stuff. And I started my spiritual journey because I really went into that, and I went to him for this personal kind of support to transform yourself. So it was not about learning some sort of, oh, I'm breathing and I'm sitting, and that is called meditation, but it was really also geared towards your personal process of your transformation that you were going through, and that would influence your entire life. Now, that was the start of 2 decades of that whole journey for me. And I have to say that knowing, let's say, my psychological problem did not per se heal it. Well, not at all, actually. But what actually healed my psychology, for it to never return these issues and to have it gone to completion, was my spiritual process. But not only my spiritual process, how I experienced it the first times, but actually, specifically, also how I experienced my spiritual process when I was extra under the guidance of the Christ mind and the Christed Masters. And I understood that now I was going to go persistingly in it and not stop until it was completed. And that was pretty much lacking earlier. I was really an example of psychological issues so big that it also really imparted my possibility to persist in a spiritual process. But when I finally saw that I could go all the way, and going all the way in the spiritual process meant I overcame my psychological issues to completion. And that is something that is still reverberating through me completely and doing its work every day on me, in the more and more of the letting go, which was never mine, and the more and more arriving in this beautiful, sane space that easily connects with you and with the golden light of union consciousness as well and stuff. Every day that is still growing and growing. But that was how it went. And then that spiritual process had taken over everything of the psychological problems. And at the end of that spiritual healing process, there was even a healing to such an extent that it was like, I can't remember that I had psychological issues. Like it is sort of really eating itself sort of alive until it's like fully gone. And that's very interesting to experience, and I really did that with persisting in my spiritual work. And what I've experienced is that there is a big blob of emotions there that needs to be worked through. And even though my psychological problems were given a name, and everything I read around the names that I sort of said, everything I sort of read around that and watched videos on it made sense. And it really was like the only way to make sense of what happened to me in the first 2 decades of my life. That was the only way that my life made sense. So it had to be that as well, even when I would have only researched it myself. But I also had it reflected to me by psychological professionals. So that was from both parts. But what I'm trying to say is that I think what I'm trying to say is that I actually lost my train of thought. And I think that's maybe just the whole point. That's the whole point. So you just lose it. You just lose the psychological issues. When you really go deep, you lose the psychological issues. Oh, yeah. So I was talking about this whole blob of emotions that we need to work through. So for me, I was able to name my psychological issues, but that's not even always beneficial because now you could go off into this direction of what this name says and read whole libraries full of books about it, but still have your issue. You see, so that's not helpful. So what I wanted to say is that it doesn't really matter if it has a name or it doesn't. Maybe it's even better when it doesn't have a name, because actually everyone has this blob of formless negative emotions that needs to be worked through. And at the end of the day, it's not a psychological issue name that it has, but it has actually for everybody the name ego. And those are all yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these are all the negative emotional things that you attach to, that you keep around because you are doing that to yourself, because you are attached to it. And that's a complete shift of thinking. That's a complete shift of being. To think about it as, oh, that's just ego. Everyone has that. Oh, it's me that is holding on to it, and that is like that shift can be light years away from I am a genuine victim of genuine abuse, and then to go towards like, but no, I am the one that chose to experience that. Apparently, I mean, I didn't, but I apparently did. I didn't, but I apparently did, because as a soul on that level, I've always chosen it. And that can be like light years apart. And that can be, I mean, even when I say something like that, that can be for people like a whole intense, enormous, seemingly never ending blob of negative emotions between the idea of I have genuinely experienced these psychological damages, and now you're saying that I actually have chosen that myself, and I can let go of that because I let go of the ego. I let go of everything that I am not. I'm let go of those emotions that I'm so accustomed to, that I'm sort of addicted to it almost. I'm attached to it, and I let that all go. And there can be a whole blob of negative emotions between those two ideas inside of you, that you, before you know it, sometimes start to project onto me that it's now my fault, that I said something awful, that you're not a victim. Mm. Yeah. So, and that is exactly that blob of emotion that I'm trying to point out. Okay. And that blob of emotion is a lot of anger and a lot of grief and a lot of sadness and a lot of uneasiness and a lot of denial and a lot of rejection and everything, and it's awful, and you need to work through it, and you need to let it go, and you need to let the ego go, and you need to feel through it if that's what you need to feel through to end it, and then you ended it. And then you'll see that the ego wasn't real at all after all, and all of that wasn't real as well. after all. That's the spiritual healing that we enter into. But the point is that you want to enter that spiritual healing genuinely and not as the new idea that I'm now stickering over reality because it sounds better, because now I am spiritual and now I have a spiritual ego. So that, of course, doesn't work. But I can just say and guarantee you that when you've worked through it, that you are genuinely arriving at the inner knowing that becomes real for you, that the ego wasn't real and your psychological issues were some sort of separated part from yourself that was, you know, wandering around for some time, but now you've seen that it wasn't even having a true sense of reality to it. Because love is real, and divine love of the twin flame is real. That is reality. And that's where you're sinking into now with faith so that you can trust on it and build on it as a steady rock, as a rock solid foundation for not only your private life, but also your mission life that can be your work life as well. And what I love to teach, your mission business. That is all founded on that healing. And psychological healing is just part of the bigger package of that healing that you're going through and that you're doing on the twin flame journey. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It is just beautiful. So I worked through this whole blob of negative emotions. Um, and that came in a certain order. And I wanted to say something about this order because I went to the twin flame love core inside of me, inside of you, inside of everybody. All right. So I worked myself via self love, that key hands you, via self love on the divine level, via divine self love. I worked myself towards a core healing in the divine love. The relationship between me and my source was at a certain point healed when I had poured that self love, that divine self love into myself enough. So that core healing took place. And I accepted everything in the world with that as well that I had. My body, my mind, my emotional life, my psychological issues, my twin flames, life and issues, the world as it is, wars as they go, the weather, I accepted, the seasons, I accepted being made of flesh and blood. And I was healed at the core, inside of me, with acceptance, which is actually simply part of that healing, but somehow I just wanted to say that with it. And that's when I eventually, and how I eventually reached the state of consciousness of harmonious twin flame union, the state of being, in other words, as well. And that state then started to move through all the aspects of me that I had accepted for what they were. And then an enormous healing after harmonious union, healing started to move through me. And that's actually where a significant part of my psychological issues were worked out in my brain patterns, in my behavior patterns, in my thinking, in my feeling. And I redid my attachment development period that you go through as a young child of approximately 1.5 years old. And I redid that with myself in an intimate healing space. And I feel that that was a great example of what people go through, and what you also will go through, that redoing of that attachment period and a redoing of any phase of your psychological development that needs redoing. And that's just a beautiful, beautiful healing. Um, I made come true that the father and the mother are real psychological stepping stones in your internal makeup, psychological makeup, and that you can connect them to the divine to be that for you. And at the same time, that it's a very real thing in humans. And that is how you, yeah, sort of re-raise yourself, redo your attachment period. I mean, like, the attachment period is just so fundamental because we're all talking about, I want to be with my true twin flame in union, but that also implies a relationship. And a relationship is about interpersonal relating, right? And that is about how you stand inside of that with your psychological attachment outcome of what you had done before. And I think it's very normal and central to this whole question that this is particularly what came up for me, but I mean, it might come up for you as well. It would seem very logical for me if it did, right? Because it is about your basis for relating. And then still, when I tell this and about how I move through this, I can so much feel that something like, and it is not even about that, something like that, like, and it is not even about that. It is really about connecting yourself back to your original design. And yes, you will go through correction. Oh, yeah, that can sometimes take a while and come with a lot of tears and so much lying awake at night and so many of these secondary symptoms of that healing. And you just move through that and feel in every step just as much at the very same time that it is for the love and the healing and the light that comes through, that you're giving that up, that you're giving all these tears. And then you learn to focus on that light and that love that you are creating inside of yourself by going through this process. And that's more than worth it. I mean, it's insane to think that it's not going to be worth it. That is just crazy. If there's anything crazy, there you have it. So, what is really crucial is that you step into that divine order. And yeah, if there's psychology to repair for you, then it will become repaired. So, there you go. And yes, you can, when you move through such phases, for extra context, make a collection of, for instance, psychological articles that you have researched and read in a put them in a binder, so you know that you've, sort of gained this as a trophy. But it is not about that. And it is not about trying to swim through libraries of psychological and developmental attachment literature or something, because you will just drown in that and it won't be connected to what you're actually moving through in the now. So I would say move through it in the now, whatever arises. That's your divine healing journey. And your twin flame will fall into place. Yeah. I would sure advise, if you can, to work out as much psychological things on that divine healing journey with yourself before connecting with the true twin flame and, let's say, moving in together and stuff. Sure, I think if you can, then I would certainly advise that. But we can't always organize what comes first and what comes next. I think that's a very wise thing to realize. I think that that is part of the surrender that is actually necessary to move through the spiritual healing of psychological problems. That you can't organize for yourself what comes first, what comes next. Eventually, it will be given to you, and you can only be where you're now and work through what is on your plate right now and how do you do that. I would suggest with the key tool that we share with you in our community on Facebook that is called Your Abundance. And you can use that group as a backdrop for your daily inner work and share about your successes and ask your questions. And there is more healing tools connected to that key tool as well, if you want to later on in your process, that I share with you in my school. And this will all contribute to your beautiful, shining, harmonious twin flame union that you so deserve, no matter what kind of issues you think you have. So I hope this helped, and I will send you to a video that I think is very fit for watching after this. I will see you there. Much love.